Welcome everyone to the V3 implementation call for January 13th. We appreciate you being here with us this morning. Just as a reminder, these V3 calls are recorded and we post them on our website and on our YouTube channel so that if there's a section that you want to go back and refresh or share with another partner on your team, those are available to you. Go ahead and advance. Take a look at the agenda today. It's full today. I think there'll be lots of great conversation. And again, please feel free to contribute or ask questions either by unmuting your microphone or by using the chat feature. We do track all of the comments and questions that are posted in chat. We'll go ahead and get started this morning with Laurel. Laurel is going to take the first two items on the agenda.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Oh, if you can't hear me, you can probably hear my dog. So our maintenance update for January, we are not doing any maintenance this month. The maintenance window for January is the 19th and 20th. That's the third Tuesday and Wednesday. Maintenance windows this year will be on the third Tuesday and Wednesday of every month. But this month we don't have any maintenance, so there will be no maintenance. Next month, we will have some maintenance though, so be prepared for the window in February. There will be some small downtimes possibly associated with that. And then as an update to vendor compliance, we have crossed into 2021 and 2020 lies behind us. And as such, any vendors who did not complete recertification or who did not meet the attendance requirement have been subject to either probation or a loss of their compliance. Those changes occurred on the 4th of January. Everyone was notified by email. And if either of those things have happened to you or your company, you would notice that you are either not on the website, the NHTSA website any longer, or you're on the website in red to indicate probation. As a reminder, those who are on probation need to attend the first 6 implementation calls of the year to move off of probation. So those are the 2 in January, the 2 in February, and the 2 in March. If you're here today, great job, you're 1/6 of the way done. Vendors who have lost compliance can appeal the decision and request an additional 30 days to complete testing, or they can complete a 6-month waiting period and reapply at the end of that 6 months. If anyone has any questions about vendor compliance, you should definitely email Julianne. Just kidding, you can email me. As well as Clay or Julianne, and we will get you the answers that you need. And if you have any questions right now, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions for Laurel?
No one ever has any questions for me. It's either very good or very bad, but I love it.
We take it as all good. Would you put your email in the chat?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that would be great. And Laurel and her compliance team are really willing and available to help with any of those questions. So feel free to reach out to Laurel Baeder, and her email is going to be in chat. Next on our list is an ET3 update. It looks like we have Neil with us, and do we have John with us this morning?
Yes, Julianne, this is John, I'm here.
Awesome.
And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just share just a couple of slides and just to give folks an update.
That would be terrific.
All right, are you able to see my slides?
Yep, it looks great, John.
All right, great. All right, just real quick, I'm just gonna give an update to where we are. So we did begin model operations January 1st. So yay to that. We're right now in the operational mode. We've got about 197 participants that are enrolled in ET3. And you know, we understand, even though the numbers are 197, there are agencies that, multiple agencies that are aligned with the 197 participants. So from an agency standpoint, that number is certainly higher. In terms of what we're looking to require, we are going to basically have submissions of PCR data from the participants. And version 3.4 is the version that we're supporting at this point. So nothing before or after these versions will be accepted. So I just wanted to make sure we're all clear about that. And we're certainly using current processes and technologies, some of which are already familiar with the vendors that have gone through the testing. So certainly, you know, we just want to reiterate that a lot of the approaches and the technologies that we're using are not going to be brand new to folks, particularly those participants that didn't participate in the testing. So just wanted to give you a comfort level there. In terms of our timeline, I just want to reiterate this slide here as well. You know, we've got two sets of PCRs here that we're looking to receive. And one of them we are tagging as historical data. So those that are generated between March 2019 to February 2020, we are looking to get those PCRs from a historical standpoint, and then anything generated after January 2021. And the deadline for those to come into CMS would be February 28th. So again, just want to reiterate that. And then subsequent data submissions, we're looking to generate for each calendar month. It'll be due the last day of the following month. So for example, any PCRs generated in February, that's going to be due on March 31st. And again, the deadline is the last day of each month starting March 31st. So I wanted to just make sure everyone's you know, on board and up to date with that. In terms of our updates, from a technical standpoint, we're looking to support the async sync processing sometime in the month of February. I'm sure we'll be back to report our status to you between now and then. So you'll get an update as to the exact date when that support has been implemented. We also have support for user ID renewal. Previously, we reported that we were looking to have this done within 30 days, but we're going to do, or every 30 days, but we're going to move this up to 90 days. So every 90 days, we will require that you renew your user IDs. In terms of registering as a submitter, meaning if you are someone that's going to submit API data submission transmissions, you need to register and then submit requests for security keys. So for those that may not have gone through some of the testing that we did last year, we do require that you do that request. And just so everyone understands, we are looking to review all requests before they're approved. So there needs to be some level of due diligence, if you will, that we're going to take with each request to make sure that the right keys are going to the right people. In terms of being prepared, we are looking at historical and currently monthly PCR data. So we can, you know, safely say that if you need to send those in bulk, we are prepared to accept them. And that any feedback that that a participant might be looking for, we're going to make that available sometime starting in the month of March. So we are talking about some level of reporting back to you, the specifics around the detailed PCR submissions that you've provided to us. I just want to point out our support there, or reiterate that we have guidance through a webinar, and there is a site that you can go to for that webinar. And just to mirror that, we have a written form, which is called our ET3 Data Submission Guide, and that's in PDF format, which is posted on our ET3 Connect site. From a help desk perspective, these are the mechanisms that you can get help. General inquiries, we're going to ask you to go directly to our ET3 help desk email. and that is posted here. We also have a phone technical help desk support, which is posted here. That's available from 8:30 a.m. in the morning to 7:30 p.m. And that's Eastern Time. So just keep that handy as well. Obviously, we can get some good support from the NEMSIS organization and from the model team here at CMS as well. So Neil and myself, we are making ourselves available. To those folks out there, again, that went through testing, I just want to reiterate to you, there is a specific URL that you want to use to submit data to production. And that's what this is. There's a WSDL address as well. So we don't need to, I've noticed that some folks are still operating with the testing URL sites that we submitted or were using last year. So just want to make sure we're pointing things up to the right URL when we're making these submissions. Okay, I'm going to pause there, and Neil, if you have any updates for us, and then I have one more thing I want to cover.
Sure, thank you, John. I don't know if this is the item you wanted to cover in a little bit, but we did get a question from one of the vendors, a good catch, honestly, about a discrepancy in the documentation. And I don't know if Josh could speak to that as well, if that was another item in the agenda, but that's just one thing I wanted to cover because it was a typo in the data submission guide. So let me pause there for John or Josh to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks. I did want to cover that. I apologize, I didn't jump right into that. Give me 1 second. I'm going to actually go to my other screen here. And hopefully you can see my screen now. Yeah, and actually I'm going to have to definitely give credit to one of the vendors, Benny, who pointed a discrepancy in the documentation. And this is sort of the example of it. We published something in September, and there was a code there that was published 4221903, which was a code assigned for the rural health clinic in terms of the description of that for that code. And Josh, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Yeah, if you can jump in and just kind of clarify and just make this,
Sure.
real clear for everybody, that would be great.
Screen sharing over if you.
Absolutely, I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
And okay. All right. So, yeah, as John mentioned, in this document, the ET3 dispositions for NEMSIS 3.4. This is a document that just outlines some scenarios. Like if this is your scenario, this is how you would report certain elements in an ET3 model. And this document had an incorrect code right here for rural health clinic. It had 4212 or 4221902, which was incorrect. The rural health clinic code custom value that we're using is 903. The ET3 state data set was always correct, had 903 for a rural health clinic. So that's been corrected in this guidance document. As you can see, it now says 903. And this is also just an opportunity to give a reminder that generally speaking, the XML-based resources are authoritative and win out in the case of discrepancies. So in this case, the ET3 state data set is an XML file that contain the correct codes. And then just this documentation document, we accidentally got a wrong code in there. So just a heads up on that.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate for pointing that out. And yeah, so I think that's pretty much it, Julianne, on my updates. And so if there's any questions or comments from the group.
We do. We've got a question from Caitlin at Angel Track.
Hey,
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so let me apologize because maybe I should have read this in the documentation somewhere, but I don't even know where to look. So I was trying to get clarity in my mind about how the ET3 credentials will work, because you said that they have to be reissued every 90 days. So would you clarify that that is going to be the provider, that's going to be the EMS agency needing to go and renew their username and their password, correct? That's the agency?
Yeah, so that, Caitlin, thanks for that question. It is a good question. So when you do go in and register, you're basically provided a CMS user ID, and that's sort of the first step in registration. And with a lot of our systems, we require a renewal of that user ID, whether you're using it to as a participant to submit PCR data, or you're using it as a participant to review and support the information that has been collected already. So anyone that is getting a CMS user ID needs to, again, renew, from a period of time now, it's going to be 90 days. So that's anyone that's going out and getting that CMS user ID. Okay.
Because I would like to be able to say to my customers, hey, you guys are responsible for getting and for renewing your ET3 username and password. I want to tell my customers, like, that's on you. Go and get it and type it into our configuration page, and then we'll just use it. But if I tell them that, and they go to get a username and a password, if ET3 is going to ask them something like, what is your IP address that you're going to be uploading from so we can put it on our whitelist, they're not going to know. So I wonder if, is there something set up where they can say, here's a pick list of PCR vendors whose IP addresses that we know about that we'll accept uploads from, and you can just tell us which app you're using? Because otherwise they're not gonna know what AngelTrack's IP address is to be whitelisted.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly something that whatever user ID is requesting a security key, they certainly need to provide the IP addresses in order to get that approval done. And so how you choose to manage that on your side, Caitlin, why don't we take this offline? And it sounds like you're coming up with some creative ways to work with your client. And we can, I can give you more information as to whether, one of the approaches is going to work versus the other. Keep in mind, everyone who requests an ID, has to go through a process by where information is provided about that individual, and there's some processes on the other side that vet that information. So obviously there's an identity verification process that takes place. So we expect that the person that requested the ID is the person that's going to be using it. So at any rate, if we could take that offline, Caitlin, I can certainly talk to you directly about that.
Okay, then I'll shut up if you'll just answer one quick question then, because maybe other people have this question too. Can you confirm that it is not crazy for me to take the approach of telling my customers, here's the configuration page, here's the URL to go and sign yourself up, you guys can do the rest? Like, is it crazy for me to think that they can handle the provisioning of an account and getting the uploader switched on without me getting involved?
So,
John,
no,
if I can take that one on the programmatic level.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. We've taken the approach when it comes to coordination between vendors and the actual participating agencies that the onus is really on the participating agencies to do everything they need to do and coordinate with you to make sure they meet their data submission pieces or requirements. And I think what you're proposing is it's in line with that they're taking the initiative and the responsibility to make sure they're set up and giving you what you need to fulfill that requirement for them. As far as we're concerned on the programmatic level, that's completely reasonable. I think John is probably alluding to some things we can do on the technical piece to make that easier for everybody. But on the programmatic level, you're dead on it. That's completely a reasonable request and a coordination between you and the agencies you support. So,
okay.
John, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's fine, Neil. That's right in line with what I was thinking as well. So that's great. So is that good, Caitlin? Did that kind of get you the answer you're looking for?
Yeah, I just wanted to settle my mind that my approach was in general was going to work, that I wanted it to be hands-off configuration. I wanted it to be, I wanted it to be possible for the agency to do everything, that if I could just provide them a help document and a page of information, like including my IP address, could they do the rest without calling me? I just wanted to make sure that approach was going to be sound.
Yeah, I think you can, based on again what Neil mentioned. I think you can be assured that that would be fine.
Hey, John.
Yeah,
I'd like to stoke the fire a little bit. Pursuant to what Caitlin just said, I feel like some vendors may have been under the impression that we needed to own the provisioning of APIs and stuff like that on behalf of our customers, especially because it's kind of a convoluted process. I'm curious if any other vendors had that takeaway.
yeah. So I don't know that other folks had that takeaway, but that was the model I think that we originally communicated to everyone with. So in other words, if you are a software vendor supporting a participant, you're looking at signing up and requesting a security key, and because you're responsible for using that security key to submit PCR submissions. Now your participant can also sign up, but from the standpoint of requesting a security key, they may not be looking at that because that function is being handled by you as the software vendor. And so I think that's the traditional model that we are expecting from most of the participant vendor that come into the program.
Okay.
Right, and I'll add that, you know, I'll take that back as falling on me for maybe not specifically detailing what falls in whose lane in there. I mean, we took the approach with vendor testing to have you, the vendors, as the subject matter experts on this, to really look at it, because we felt that if we had, for a few reasons, bringing in participants at that time was both kind of legally and policy messy for us, since they had not signed an agreement, but as well that it would have been almost secondhand communicating technical information through them to you. And it was much better to have, from our perspective, have the technical experts work with us, give us feedback on how we could do this, get the communication piece done. And I think we felt that it would be better to support the participants since you'd have that knowledge base. And we can communicate that in a revision or some other way of communication that really this is the recommended approach that we would have for participants, that they own that and facilitate what the vendors need to do to submit data on their behalf. We do leave it open to how that's arranged. You know, it's between the participants and the vendors, or the participating EMS agencies and the vendors, but the true responsibility does lie on the participants, and we leave it somewhat open for how they meet that responsibility for data submissions. But as you all are saying, I think there's very good arguments for how we partition this and put more of the provisioning of these keys or other pieces on the side of the participants, and just enabling you to focus on the data submission piece from there, rather than focusing as well on access and getting API keys. So we can take that back as well, but appreciate the comments.
Since we have you, and before we move on, I noticed in slide 3 of John's presentation, there was a requirement to submit back data from 2019 to early 2020, and then a gap between then and January 2021. We're starting to meet with some of our customers, and we're going to have to probably relay this to them, and they're going to have questions as to the rationale behind those submission sort of timelines.
Sure, I can briefly comment on that, and happy to take some more specific questions, and we can put out more detailed formal communication on that. The reason for the gap, you'll notice that the period starts in 2019, as you said, and then ends in 2020. Notice that it ends in the month just before the declaration of the public health emergency. That's the specific reason for that gap, is the need for ET3 models, and the way CMMI approaches it is we usually approach by having a year's worth of operational data as a baseline to kind of set some sort of standard before the model is in place. one of the things that we encountered when we were looking at how we would go through with the evaluation of the model is just really the effect of the public health emergency on your operations and really the operations of the EMS agency. So for a slightly cleaner data set, we looked at moving it to the year that we usually look for, but also moving it to a year that doesn't include the public health emergency time period. And so that's where that 2019 to 2020 period comes in rather than just straight calendar year 2020. So some of it was really heavily driven by the evaluation needs. The other thing I'll add, and John can certainly speak to this too, is we found from some participants that, that oddball kind of year time frame sometimes is not the easiest to work with when it comes to replaying or resubmitting those PCRs from that period. What we can say on our side is if you submit PCRs from a period that maybe adds to either end of that, we set up the system to really just ignore that and really take and process only that time period that we've required. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, John, before we turn it back over for any more questions.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. Yeah. So we will handle whatever you send in from the standpoint of making sure that we're accepting what we've asked for. And so I think we've already covered that actually with one of the vendors. So. Any more questions or? Okay.
Yeah,
Julianne?
what about, hey guys, what about IPv6 uploads?
So, Kaylin, give me the exact question you have.
Since you're asking for IP addresses that you'll be receiving uploads from, have you guys thought about IPv6, or is that going to be forbidden? Because that would certainly be simpler if it just wasn't allowed.
So I'll tell you what we'll do. Let me take that back to the development team. I think we did talk about that at one point last year, but let me see where that conversation is and see whether there's support for it there. And I'll send something out to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, Julianne, back to you.
There we go. Any other questions for John and Neil while we have them?
Can I have a small quick question, please?
Sure.
Regarding what Caitlin asked a few minutes ago, assuming the agencies themselves are going to be updating their users every 90 days, would they have to go through the entire process, including the IPs and the security keys, if it's just an update? True, update itself is substantial and needs to be maintained periodically. But if you already know which vendor they're using and how and through who they're transmitting, and it's a matter of updating their credentials, do they really need to go through the entire process, or can you simply pick a vendor, or simply update the credentials for the vendor that they're already associated with?
Yeah, so again, the request for security keys is always tied to a user ID. So that user ID, if you renew it, that's really the main step that you have to take. You don't have to request security keys every 90 days, in other words. So it is tied to user ID. And again, if you're renewing that user ID every 90 days, you're good. And that's the only step you need to take.
Okay, so as long as those focus it just on the user ID without touching the keys. Okay, understood. Thank you.
That's correct. Yep.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, John and Neil, for the update and for answering all of those questions. We appreciate that. Next on the agenda is Josh.
Julianne.
Yes.
Julianne, it's Eric. I just want to say something about ET3 in general and overall. So in terms of a federal process with multiple federal agencies and involvement from 50 states and all the EPCR vendors and the data managers and the TAC, I don't think I could ask for a smoother process. This all started out of a conversation with a lady named Carly Bird, who was originally assigned to be the project manager for the overall ET3 project. And I called her leaving a meeting, a NEMSAC meeting, where they basically spent about an hour and a half originally just asking question after question after question. And I said, Carly, you know, if we don't get the data part of this right up front and have you guys work with NEMSIS and you guys create your own data sets, this is going to go sideways quick. And this was very early in the process. We weren't sure how we were going to work together with anyone. And basically, from that conversation, we've gotten to this point. And it's through the work, like, you know, Benny pointing out things that are in error, Caitlin's questions, that the ability for her to directly ask questions, and John and Neil making themselves available to hit the specific answers so she can move forward. And you know, like the vendor testing piece, we asked early on, we were only going to do one, and we realized that wasn't enough. So we made more available. And there were some vendors, R1, for example, who stepped up and I think put some extra time into it. And not saying that others didn't. I just know in this specific case, they put some extra time in it to do some things to make sure we had some things in place. I can't ask for any better participation in any smoother process. So for all of you to go from nothing to January 1st, we started this process with no more hiccups and problems than we've had. I thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Eric, for adding that. Let's go ahead and move to Josh for the next item on the agenda for immunization vaccine documentation.
Yes, give me just one moment here. Last month we brought some proposals to you all for creating a few national custom elements related to immunization history and also to the possibility of EMS administering vaccines and wanting to record those in their patient care reports. So we've finalized those custom elements, and give me just a second here to get some screen sharing prepared, and we'll kind of show you what we've got so far. Okay, there we go. So the custom elements that we came up with, we have merged into the NEMSIS National Custom Elements state dataset file that you can find in the repository. Also, if you go to the NEMSIS Custom Element Library, you'll find the National Custom Elements included in that library as well. Before I go through what we ended up doing, I just want to put out the reminder that national custom elements, just because they have the word national in them, does not mean that they are submitted to the national EMS database. No custom element data is ever submitted to the national database. So the only rationale behind creating custom elements is to provide some standardized reference that can be used at the local and state levels for elements that may be of broad interest to the EMS community to implement. And they could be implemented in a fairly standard way across different states and across different agencies and across different vendors. But none of this data will be ever submitted to the national database. Now, potentially, custom elements could be rolled into future versions of the NEMSIS standard and become standard elements at that point. Okay, so what did we end up doing? We ended up adding first of all, for immunization history, 2 elements. What you're seeing on this large list here is all of the national custom elements. So I'll just highlight the ones that we've added for immunization history, and one of them is adding a value to dpersonnel.18 for EMS personnel's immunization status, so that you can record that an EMT or paramedic or whoever working for the agency was vaccinated for COVID-19, in addition to all the other vaccinations they may have had in the past. And in the ePCR, we added in a custom value for ehistory.10 to record the patient's immunization history for COVID-19. So in addition to recording that they've got the flu shot or tetanus or whatever, you can also indicate that they've been vaccinated for COVID-19. For the administration of vaccines by EMS, we added these elements that you'll see here, several elements to the e-medications section to, and I'll go ahead and blow this up at this point, having to do with medication dose number, so they're dose number 1 or 2 in the series, the manufacturer of the medication, the lot number and expiration date of that specific vial of vaccine. And we also added custom values to medication complication and procedure complication, just one custom value for syncope or fainting. I do want to zoom in on medication manufacturer. We had discussion about how to do that, how to code that, whether to use some existing reference code set. We ended up going with text, but provided a reference list of 5 manufacturers that currently are in final stages or production of COVID-19 vaccines. But we just went with the actual text of their company names. We took that text from the vaccine manufacturer data set from the Immunization Information System standards, but we didn't use the codes from that standard. We just used the text. We looked at other standards too, such as the FDA manufacturer list as well, before taking this route. Okay, so that's what's been added in. Those are available in the state data set for the national custom elements. Let's see, while I have one more thing that I'll, there's some guidance document being created I'll talk about in just a sec. I think we do have a raised hand from Doug Butler. So Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, 2 things. The chat seems to be disabled. I don't know if it's just for the imaging people. I can confirm with our team, none of us can chat. I kind of thinking about the code, we would really suggest, Nemesis, if you would look at the FDA list. You know, the code with a name, that just leaves a headache. And I think we've experienced this over the years with Nemesis. When you start using a name as a code versus numeric, it's just going to be a nightmare, especially as new people add stuff in. All right, is everyone going to do Pfizer Inc.? What if Pfizer changes their company standard? You know, we used the FDA list, the FDA established ID number. I was going to put that in the chat. Even if a manufacturer has multiple drugs or they have sub-companies, that number is consistent across the board. So it's very easy to report off of, very easy to gather data.
The FDA list, as I reviewed it, was pretty messy. For example, AstraZeneca had several FDA numbers, and some of these companies weren't even listed on the FDA medication manufacturer list. So that was a challenge.
Yeah, I'm sending you guys an email because I can't put in the chat. I don't know if you guys are using Access Data. There's multiple different registries for the FDA drugs. The one that we used was the registration by manufacturer, not the actual drug product. And that is consistent across the board. Oh, it looks like it's working now. I'll put this into the chat. I don't know. I would just ask Nemesis to reconsider that. You know, in this example, you'll see that A&Z Pharmaceuticals is listed multiple times in there, but they all have the same number. And that just seemed to be the best approach that we found here at Immunization.
Okay, we'll take a look at that specific link that you sent. I'll double check if that is the link that I was reviewing last week. We did provide these in here in this list this way so that they would be standardized in terms of their spelling, that those would be the specific recommended strings of text to use. But yeah, I'll take a look at that link and we'll do more research on that. Okay, in addition to these just being added to this state data set file, Chris Hoffman at the Nemesis TAC has been preparing a guidance document for immunization history and for vaccination administration. Chris, has this been published yet, or are we still finalizing it?
It's on the website now.
Oh, great. Okay. Let's go to the website. And let's see. Okay, you want to direct me to where to find it on the website?
Yes, under technical resources. And then national custom element? No, I apologize. I just put it up this morning and now I can't remember exactly where it is. If anyone can help me out.
That's correct. That's correct, Chris. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so go to the National Custom Element Library and just scroll down there a little bit.
Okay, there we go.
Thanks, Clay.
Down here at the bottom, the Immunization and Vaccination National Custom Data Elements. So this is a guidance document to accompany what's in that state dataset file. And let's open it up and take a look at what this covers. So it shows these, it kind of summarizes what's been added for the purpose of tracking immunization history and also vaccination administrations. So it's got the two customizations to immunization history. It lists the custom elements related to medication administration. And then in addition to that, you'll see here it talks about the RX norm code to use in eMedications 03. This is also something we discussed last month. We noticed that RX norm had assigned a couple of inactive codes to the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. In the January release of RX norm, those codes were replaced with more, I guess I would say, standardized RX norm codes. This particular code here is an ingredient code for a COVID-19 vaccine that uses the mRNA spike protein approach. In addition, there are two codes that are for precise ingredients that would indicate those two different variants of that form of vaccine, one being the one manufactured by Moderna and the other being manufactured by Pfizer. So an EMS agency could use this 2468231 code as the ingredient code for a COVID-19 mRNA spike protein vaccine. Or if they wanted to get more specific, they could use these two specific ingredient or precise ingredient codes that would actually differentiate between the two vaccines that are currently out in the market. So that would be the recommendation for the RX norm code for eMedications.03. Okay, and then at the bottom of the page here outlines how to use the external data group in the e-outcome section to track an immunization information system patient ID. And finally, on the second page, some links to CDC resources related to immunization information systems. So that's what's out there. Other questions?
Josh, there was a question in chat. Is there a plan for adding additional manufacturers to the list of the vaccine manufacturers?
Yeah, if they end up being recognized as a vaccine manufacturer, we'll be watching the immunization information system standards where they have a list of vaccine manufacturers. And so we've got a few kind of on our watch list. Sinovac, for example, would be one. That's a Chinese manufacturer undergoing trials right now. So if we see that pop up as being something that could be used in the US, then we'll go ahead and add it.
Are there any other questions for Josh?
Okay, thanks.
All right, next on our list, we're gonna turn some time over to Clay.
All right, great. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can share my screen here. All right, fantastic. I've been asked to cover two quick topics. Both of these are more or less specific to the states. So state data managers appreciate your attention, and it'll be great for the vendors to kind of know what's going on as well in regards to these two things that we're trying to develop as we move forward into 2021. I'm going to mention here just first off the idea that we have been trying to develop a dashboard. It's ready for release right now that looks at some different types of response and offload and preparing to get back into service times. All of those related to different activities that may be delayed just due to the pandemic, right? So wanted to show you the kind of offload time dashboard that we'll be rolling out here very soon. It will allow the states to be able to choose their states here. Right now, a letter is being crafted, and maybe Eric will talk a little bit about this when he gets time for the NHTSA update. A letter where we're asking the states perhaps to allow this dashboard to be used much like the ILI dashboard, so that states can see other states' data, so they can see what's happening on the borders of their states. In that case, then states will be able to see all states that agree to that. So 40 states agree to the ILI dashboard that's currently being used. So that may change a little bit as we gain permission from states. But then there'll be 3 types of patients here. You'll be able to look for all patients for what we're calling priority 1 patients. And so patients who should be offloaded quickly, severe trauma, time-sensitive issues, cardiac arrest, STEMI, stroke. And then there'll be 3 elapsed times. There's 2 right now. One is offload time, and so that's from the time the patient arrives at the hospital until when the emergency department takes responsibility for the patient, right? So this is dealing with that issue, for example, in California that's happening where patients are being cared for in parking lots until emergency departments have room to take on that responsibility. So this will allow the states to be able to look at that offload time and then turnaround time. I'll just roughly say this is kind of the decontamination time, right? Once the patient is handed off, how long before the unit can be back in service, right? So how long do they need to clean the patient compartment before they can be back available? This will be updated on a very timely basis, either daily or every other day. We're still working through that process. And so that the states will be able to quickly look and see if there are areas within their state where there is long offload times or long turnaround times. The other elapsed time that we're planning to add is response time. And this is the idea where perhaps because of the kind of onslaught of ILI or COVID-related calls, or perhaps other calls are being delayed that could be time sensitive. That hasn't been added yet. We're still working with NHTSA to figure out kind of how that would happen. There's the areas on the map represent zip codes, and that is for a specific purpose. Many of the larger hospitals have their own zip code, or it's a refined enough measure that a state could look and see specifically a geographic location who may need some further help or triage guidelines in regards to EMS care. So, and then there'll be a legend associated with for what percentage of calls over a certain time period could be expected and thus are green versus the percentage of calls perhaps where it's now getting to be an issue, and then red where perhaps there truly is an issue associated with the pandemic. So those times differ based on the elapsed time that you're looking at. So that's basically what that will look like as that rolls out. And as I mentioned, there'll be a letter that will be circulated to states to determine how much of the data you would be able to see in this dashboard. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions related to this dashboard.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. One of them that I answered, the inclusion criteria will be defined in the companion document that will be part of the dashboard. Anne asks if turnaround time includes back in service time.
Yeah, turnaround time, the end date time is back in service. Yep. So it includes from the time that the patient is handed off to the emergency department until they're back in service.
Okay, this is Anne, and I was going to type another question, but I'm not a fast enough typist. So related to that, and this is more just a heads up, because I know this is going to happen in my state, and it's nobody's fault. This is just how we do it in our state. Everybody's a special unicorn, right, Eric? It's my favorite quote. Anyway, I found out that years ago when times were really wonky in our order of timeline, that in Arizona, all of the municipal fire agencies that I know of will like show up with a rig, whether or not they have an ambulance, transfer one of their paramedics onto that transporting ambulance, and then keep one of their paramedics in most cases, goes back on the rig and goes back in service. And the reason this is important is they're putting in their back in service time as when their paramedic goes back on the rig. So quite often they're back in service before the patient actually leaves with the other paramedic to go in the ambulance. The times are out of order. So I'm back in service before they leave the scene. And I can't do anything about it because they use that back in service time for their, I guess, to alert their dispatch that they are available for another call. So I don't have a problem with, I think this dashboard's amazing. I just want to point out that for my state, if someone were to look at it and be like, wow, their turnaround times, I don't even know. I think they, unless you're eliminating times that don't make sense. And I don't know how that would work. I just wanted to kind of mention that. I don't know how it plays in.
Anyway, that's a really good point. I remember that's true in Arizona. We don't have logic that is removing times that are out of sequence. Let me think about that, Anne. Yeah, let me look deeper into that kind of idea, because you're right that the time periods would be out of order in that case, and so you would have a time sequencing that would look negative.
Right.
Let me take a look at that. Yeah, it's a good question, Anne.
And I would love to have this available. I love the ILI dashboard. By the way, thank you, whoever added back in the timeline where you can adjust the dates in a very specific form so you can overlap years. But I just want to, like I said, I don't know if other states are like this. And these are the kind of things that if someone were to look at my data and try to compare it to, say, like South Carolina, they might get a really wrong impression about how we're doing on that compared to that.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne.
Mark Roberts.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, so in California, depending upon the LIMSA in the area, I mean, at a state level, every agency is allowed so many minutes before they're considered to be late in offloading. And so is this going to take that into consideration, or is this going to just be raw time from the time they arrived to the time they went back in service, period? And I mean, because that's really important. If we're looking at state reports versus local reports versus your dashboard, we're all going to get different numbers.
Right, Mark. So you're talking about the specific California APOT time, as it's called?
Right, but there's some LIMSAs that you know, we have our own, San Bernardino has its own times, which are different than the state's times.
Oh.
So when we report locally, we report what is in our, you know, responsibility, versus when we turn in reports to the state, we use their criteria. So there is differences.
Right. There is going to be differences. And for the APOT time, so that's the ambulance patient offload time is what California calls that. These metrics are based on greater than 60 minutes, right? So if 10% of the calls within a certain time period have an APOT time greater than 60 minutes, it turns red. So yeah, you're right,
yeah,
Mark.
So some of us are actually even using signature time, because the hospitals scream and holler that the transfer actually took place. We're not responsible that it took them 45 minutes to go grab a bite to eat before they went back in service. So there's a lot of variables there that can contradict what we're actually putting out locally or even at a state level.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. Well,
something to think about.
Okay, thank you. That's actually helpful. So thank you.
Will you address real quick Doug Butler's question about vendor access to this dashboard? And then we've got a couple other questions in chat. just with inconsistency between rural and urban areas, that's one of the questions as well.
Yeah. So Julianne, did you ask me to take that question? Doug's question.
Yes, if you would, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question, Doug. I can't see the chat because of the way my screens are set up, but in regards to vendor access to this dashboard, that's a really good thought, and I'll document that. We will talk to Eric right after this call. That brings a different wrinkle into our request to the states to be able to share data across states, but it's worth a conversation. I appreciate that, Doug.
And Clay, even if it was just sharing your documents with your criteria, so that if a client comes to us and say, hey, we want to break this down a little bit more, that the vendor community has that capability of just saying, oh, this is what NHTSA used, here's the exact information. Even if you don't grant us access to the dashboard, I think that's fine. It's just more making sure that if someone wants to run it on their own independent system, we have that capability of providing them those tools.
Okay, great. Yeah, there will be a user's guide, and we'll make sure that that's available to the vendors. Yeah, thank you, Doug.
Yeah, Clay, this is Eric. There's no reason that information can't go out to all the vendors of how any of this was developed or what any of the criteria are that's there. And if anybody has questions about the criteria in the background, please let me know. Realize that if I was going to do this, APOT times would not be my data element or metric of choice. This was actually brought to us from ASPR and HHS as one of the metrics that they wanted to look at. And I think it's primarily due to, well, I know it's due to the waiting times at hospitals and all the press that's getting and all the understanding they're trying to get wrapped around how to address that, how different people are addressing that, just how bad it is in certain areas. I do want to go back and I was going to talk about this a couple minutes ago or a little bit later, but we'll address some of it now. So there'll be a letter going out to the state EMS directors this afternoon from our office, signed out by Dr. Kramer, that basically extends the request for the ILI dashboard. That's just part of a housekeeping thing for us, but then also to ask about the release of indicators for EMS by the numbers with more of a surveillance system looking specifically at county and zip code level data. So this is sort of the next step for us in terms of surveillance level zip code and county data. That's coming from the Healthcare Resilience Working Group from the White House. Basically, there's a letter that Thuy Sim, who is the lead for all of HHS's COVID activities, who will be sending this letter out also. We'll be sending that out to the states. We'll be making that available to the regional administrators at HHS and others to say, basically, they want more EMS data at a surveillance level. They're looking for specifics related to offload times and some other data elements, basically to support their common operating picture. So this is another version of what was put out in March, the White House request letter that came out from Vice President Pence, then specifically to long-term care facilities and hospitals requesting more specific data to be provided. And we've moved very carefully through these requests because of our data use agreements with the states. But it's clear now that moving forward, we have to work at a more detailed level. I think there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do, myths that we're going to have to dispel, and sort of past practices that we're going to have to consider. And we just kind of explored one of them. There are nuances to this data from state to state, and that's okay. That's great. That there's that much interest and people are looking at it, and they look at it a little differently from place to place. Someone said just a couple minutes ago about comparing Arizona to South Carolina. I don't know that we would do that for patient offload times. We've reported at a national level so that someone sitting in a command center at the HHS could look at it and see what it is for California or see what it is for South Carolina. But that data, especially when you get the zip code level data, whether it's a rural area or urban area, is specific to that area. And comparing South Carolina to California really wouldn't get you anything. There's really no merit to it. And doesn't mean that somebody wouldn't do it. It just means that if someone did, we would have to step back and say, hey, look, the population density and the hospital density and healthcare facilities in South Carolina are a little bit different than they are in the Los Angeles, California area. So we have to be prepared to make those explanations. And we do that now at a national level all the time. Clay and I get questions almost daily about what does this mean? We put out EMS by the numbers, and people look at the mental health and data that we put out, and they have questions about, is this overall? Can we get this at is this pediatrics included? No, we just exclude certain patients. I mean, some of the questions are so no-brainer, you just wonder why they even think them up, but they do. They ask some really dumb questions sometimes. So bottom line up front, we are exploring more and more into the surveillance level. This is a good example of how we get to that. The big question always becomes, Doug, who gets access to it? And if it were up to me, we give everybody access to it. Here's what the numbers are. And if you have questions about them, by all means, here are the people that you need to talk to. And for us, that's always the state data manager, or if it's specific to a locality and we know who that is, we'll be happy to provide them with the local EMS director. So again, new into the process. There's going to be a learning curve along with it. We're trying to be as open and forthright about it as we possibly can, but this is just a stepping off point. There's going to be a lot more requests like this to come, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about that.
Hey, Eric, it's Mark Roberts again. I appreciate this a lot. It looks really nice. I just am thinking that because we have our own documents that we're putting out, or we have our own reports that we're putting out, and then you guys put something out that contradicts or doesn't agree with what we're putting out, it just creates more people calling us going, well, who's right? What's the difference? And then we spend all of our time trying to explain the differences between the two. And so, that's just all I would offer, is that it could actually end up creating more work for us answering phone calls and trying to explain the differences. That's kind of where I'm at. But thank you for the work. I appreciate
Mark. I think you're pointing out at a national level, one of the biggest challenges. We're always pushing somebody forward and holding somebody back. In your case, in this example, we're not really holding you back, but we're kind of holding you back or creating problems. I think where we win with this is that we look at what you're doing and try to use that as the base and example. And I'll use ketamine, for example. So as we started to get pushed with ketamine, and that's on my list of things to talk about a little bit later as well, from other federal agencies, we started looking around to see what was done. And we went right to Amber in Colorado and said, hey, look, what have you done? And then we found out that ESO had done a lot of work with this, Dr. Myers working with ASEP and others. So the key for us in this is to not recreate something and to use what's already been done, leverage that, and build it out nationally. And I think what you're pointing out, Mark, is another good example. So when we get to topics like this and we have these meetings with the data managers and with the vendors, where you've already done something with APOT times, this just happens to be the topic today, we need to not recreate that. It should make sense if you've done it that way, that we can just build off of that and then move that out across the country. Now, there's always going to be that variation. If I was able to eliminate that across the United States, I wouldn't be in this position. I can guarantee you that. So we have to find a way to eliminate the variation wherever possible. But I would say that whatever we're doing, since we're pulling from the same data, should be pretty consistent. It just may be the terminology that's used and how it's actually reported. So if you have a more interesting way, a better way, or a more accurate way, by all means, we would love to see it.
Great comments, great, Eric. And I do have access to the chat now, so I'll walk down through a couple of these. I think you spoke to Chris's question about the idea that there's going to be differences in rural versus urban, and we just expect the states to be able to look at that and go, okay, well, that's a rural area, so I'm not worried about that versus an urban. So there'll be
But one point, Clay, in there is that we're going to use the USDA code. We're going to use the codes that we use now for rural versus urban. And we have seen people say, hey, look, we're going to call this ultra urban or ultra, different titles or different things. And that's where we really get into hangups when people start to retitle things. So we try to stay consistent across the board with not just what our agency or the TAC finds, but with other national standards. And that's going to be really critical as we move into the discussion on HIEs and working with ONC, because they are not, and we've already learned this with the ET3 process, these are not people that are going to recreate their data sets for us. We're going to have to find a way to work within their world to some point. Now, we do have some wiggle room, but it's not going to be, hey, look, here's what we do. You need to adopt that. It's not going to fly.
Yeah. And to answer Ann's question specifically related to that, we measure urbanicity using the USDA urban influence codes. And we can give you a link to where that's at. Maybe Julianne can find that quickly. I'm going to walk down through the comments just real quickly. Caitlin brought up some great points about just how there are times where the EMS E-times section can be in conflict. We'll look into those. Thank you, Caitlin. Ann asked about type of service requested. Can that be added to this? That's a great question. We talked about that a lot because there could be real differences in interfacility transports associated with this pandemic. Right now, the inclusionary criteria for this dashboard is a 911 response with patient contact. But that's a great question, Ann. I think that's one that we need to consider to add. So appreciate that. Okay, great. Yeah, great questions. Any more questions related to this dashboard? Okay, great conversation. Really appreciate that very much. Thanks, folks. The second one is also related to this AIDS and would love to have feedback as well. The idea here is that we have the NEMSIS PPE/COVID dashboard that's being used by a number of agencies across the state. About 200 to 300 agencies across the country submit this data every week, and the states who utilize it are able to look for agencies that have shortages in PPE or maybe are experiencing a lot of their professionals having been exposed to COVID. Here's just a picture of the survey reporting tool that's available on the website. I just showed that to kind of get people all on the same page. Here's the dashboard as it currently is available to states. I've masked the agency name and phone numbers and the contact name, but here's where they indicate if there seems to be some personnel shortages associated with COVID exposures or some PPE that needs to be made available. Some states use this a lot. Some states don't use it very much. But the idea is to potentially revise the survey so it's much simpler than it is now, but to add a few questions related to the vaccine, current status of vaccine use among rostered personnel within an EMS agency. So you can take a look at the questions here. There's an initial question at the top of the survey about how many rostered personnel are within your agency. Using that question and then answering these 4 questions, it would be possible to determine what percentage of the total rostered personnel have received a first dose, how many have received their second dose, and how many have refused to be vaccinated. There could be a percentage that could be generated for the states as they look at this dashboard every Monday morning or whenever they look at it. They'd be able to determine if there's some agencies that need additional vaccine or if there's other issues. So again, that's what we're thinking about in regards to the questions. Emma, I think from Wisconsin. I think Emma's from Wisconsin, and she helped a lot with the development of these questions. She's the data manager there. Any questions about the idea of potentially adding these questions to the PPE COVID survey and then to the dashboard for states. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Again, just provide your questions in the chat. We'll get back to if we don't get a chance to answer them on the call. As folks know, this call does go for 90 minutes, and so we're not over yet with the call. So thank you for your patience, and I'll turn back over the screen, Julianne. I know we've got a lot of other areas to cover. So
we do. Next up is Kevin White. He's going to talk for a few minutes about vendor dashboard.
Hi, thank you, Julianne. Yeah, we'll just do this. We'll do this very quickly. So we talked about this dashboard last time we met, at least last time I was here. And there's nothing new to add in terms of we haven't added any new functionality to this dashboard, but we were really gratified to get many requests from software vendors to have access to this dashboard. So the only real update I want to say is that we believe that we have fulfilled all of those requests for access. If you requested access and you feel like your request has not been fulfilled, please let us know. If you forgot and you still want access to this dashboard, please let us know. Send all those requests to either Monet or myself, and we will get them addressed as quickly as possible. Thank you, Julianne.
Thanks, Kevin. Would you put your email address and Monet's in the chat just so that's easy for vendors to access?
Absolutely.
Okay. And next up is Monet. Monet, do you want to take the screen?
Yes. Let me make sure I can find where I want to be. Okay. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. I want to extend a Happy New Year greetings to everyone. And let's see, I basically want to talk a little bit about the submission summary dashboard. This is a state dashboard. I wanted to basically say that the data quality is improving. I'm highlighting the state of Indiana here. I've been working a lot with Randall Eimerman in Indiana and several other managers. Randall allowed me to share his dashboard this morning because what we wanted to basically talk about is the fact that the failed submissions is pretty good. I mean, it's excellent right now. He has increased his participation of his agencies, so this number is reflected accurately. And although the number of PCR warnings are a little higher than we would like them to be at this time, he said, stay tuned because we will be working on these warnings and you will eventually see an update to this dashboard, which will show that the rate of the warnings are going down. I also want to thank Joe in Kansas. There's Chip Cooper in New Hampshire, North Carolina, South Carolina, and the team in Texas. They're all doing an excellent job. And there are so many other managers that I could add to this list. So many of the managers have mentioned that these tools have allowed them to submit their grants, update their annual reporting requirements. So again, a huge thank you. And if you have not yet accessed this dashboard or any of the other state dashboards, please send me an email and we can schedule between 15 and 30 minutes time to review any of these tools. I would also like to mention that this year we have updated our AD, Active Directory account policy. So if the accounts have been inactive for more than a year, we will start deactivating those accounts. So I would really like to encourage you to use your accounts. If you have staff that you need to activate an account for, please let us know. I want to show you how to get to the dashboards from the NHTSA website. So there's two ways you can get there, but I'll just start with view reports. It's under state reports. These are the version 3 dashboards, and there are several dashboards here on this list. So this dashboard is the second to last dashboard. There's the link. There's your user manual, and then also a video. Okay, now my next topic, let's see, what's my next topic? The state plans for the V3-5 transition. So I am going to send a link to the chat. If I can find my chat. And Chris, can you help me get some groovy music going?
Absolutely.
Okay. So everyone, we are in the process. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna stop my share. And I'll let you share, Chris. We are in the process of the transition from the put it on pause for me for just a second. So we are in the version 3.5.0 standard transition phase. And in the past, you will see that every state page has information about your transition. So what we would like to do, we do realize that the pandemic has caused a hold on many things. But as a reminder, the NHTSA TAC will no longer accept version 3.3.4 after March of this current year. And I believe that there are currently 11 states that are exclusively submitting the version 3.3.4 data. So we would like to hear from the state managers and directors who are on the call, if you could please take 30 seconds to respond to a 4-question survey that's currently added to the link.
3.3.4 will sunset in August of this year.
Yeah, 3.3.4, and then the version 3.4.0 is scheduled to expire in 2023.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see it in the chat now?
No, there's no link in the chat.
Well, my chat doesn't seem to be working. Let's see if I have it on everyone. I apologize. Okay.
There it came through. Yep.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move along since we are running out of time. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'm
Renee, real quick.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Renee, real quick. For those everyone on the line, while people are responding to the chats, just any comments about the expiration dates on 3.4 or 3.3.4, just in general, I'd love to hear them, especially if they're, hey, look, we have a real problem here, or, you know, absolutely no problem at all, let's move ahead. I mean, I'm kind of looking for the background noise on this.
As a state, this is Ann in Arizona, and I'm like, I can only speak for myself. I just want to know if it's going to move or not, because all of my planning is around that. I'm sure everyone's the same. So I don't mind myself so much when it is, so much as if it's going to move, I would prefer it move sooner than later so that I can plan.
Well, the open and upfront answer is I don't want to move it at all. However, I'm also not willing to put many states out if we have 5 or 6 states that are just going to absolutely get crushed by this requirement, this change. Then we need to address it, and I'd like to address it sooner rather than later. So that's why Monet's jumping through the hoops here to figure out if we really have a problem or we're ready to go ahead. So if there's no other comments, please respond to the survey. If we don't have the people responding, then we're going to reach back out and make sure we got a response for all of those that are involved in this.
Eric, this is Ben from Image Trend. I don't want to speak on behalf of our state clients. I know at least one situation where we do have a state that is 3.3.4 and their desire, you know, I think anyone who still is 3.3.4, right, they've probably just gotten to the point where they were waiting for 3.5 and it just became impractical to go to 3.4. So just from a timing standpoint, you know, I think we're working with them. One in particular, they're, you know, kind of doing some implementation work now, but I just kind of maybe want to put that on the horizon, is that changing your NHTSA version is probably the most onerous task that a state can perform. And so getting them off 334, if things go to plan, of course, we're all aware of the timelines, but I just maybe like to throw out there that how government works, and you're not talking about state government, you're talking about state government times X number of county governments and
Right.
Business, private businesses as well. So we're trying to help our states, and I think all of our states are trying to, accommodate the timeline, but just for awareness.
I hear you loud and clear, Ben. And I know of one other state, and you're not the client for that state, or you're not the vendor for that state that has a significant challenge. So that's two that I know of. So let's say by this time next month, we'll have a definitive answer on whether we're going to move any of these timelines based on the information Monet collects from this survey and any feedback that we get from this call and the state data managers say in the next, between now and the end of the month. Is that pretty fair to everybody?
No, I think that's fine. And like I said, really we view ourselves as just a facilitator for the state, and we try to keep them abreast. But, really at the end of the day, it is kind of their decision of how to deal with, the agencies and the counties, et cetera. And so, but no, I think we'll probably all know more in a month.
Yeah, I do. And I'll point this out since you mentioned government. So we're in unprecedented times, everyone knows that. But in terms of government planning, we're in kind of a strange situation. We're in that point where we're still paying for a response and money is still flowing. My fear as a planner who's budgeted out through 2023 now is that at some point we have to write checks for all this money that we've put out. And that money has to come from somewhere. And at the federal government, they make massive cuts to different things, and they have historically been able to come up with that funding. I don't know that the local and some of the smaller states or not as well-funded states are going to be able to pull those resources. So when they start making those cuts, fire and EMS are going to really take a hit, and the smaller services are going to rely on those grants and funding that streams that come through government. They're not going to be there, or I anticipate they're not going to be there. I don't know that for a fact. So I'm taking that into consideration, Ben, as well, when we start to talk about what the expectations are. And as you pointed out, this is a huge move for these organizations, and it's costly in terms of what they're used to paying for. So believe me, I have all that in the back of my mind as we start to talk about these decisions. Over.
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, sorry everyone. I know that the link is not working appropriately. I apologize for that. I tested it last night, but okay, let me, in the interest of time, move on to the next issue. So we're closing the 2020 calendar data set in preparation for the public release. And the TAC is on track to close out the 2020 year with approximately 50 million activations by February 1st. We would love to have a complete data collection from every state. And so as you can imagine, due to COVID, researchers across the nation are extremely interested in the pre-hospital data. It appears that some states have either paused or slightly delayed data. And so I will start contacting the states and some of the vendors to try to understand the issues, work through the barriers, and offer TAC assistance. This is not to put anyone on the spotlight. You can't see the states, but you can see we have a couple of gaps. And one other thing I would like to mention is that if you currently are submitting 2021 data and we don't have a full complete November or December, if it's possible, please hold those submissions for 2021 so that we can complete the 2020 year. Are there any questions about this? Okay, thank you so much for your, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm sorry, I think I hear someone.
I would just want to ask Monet, I don't think we would end up pausing our submissions, but if we did, wouldn't that affect the live dashboards like the ILI one?
you know, it might affect some of the dashboards, but one of the things I understand is that servers have a certain capacity. So if you're trying to submit both your current data and your old data, maybe there's going to be some time lapse. All I'm saying is we really would like to try and get the 2020 data in the system. And if it's possible, because what I've noticed is that there is some 2020 data coming in for January, but we still don't have November or December data for some states. And I know that may have to do with lag, submission lag that's held up by the agencies and managers needing to sign off on those records. It's just a request. I know some systems can't turn things off, but I do know that other systems can at least halt the export for the 2021 data until the 2020 data is completely finished. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Julianne, back to you.
All right, thank you, Monet. Just real quick, and I'll put my email address in the chat as well. If you have ideas or requests that you would like to see for public, state, vendor trainings or presentations, we're building out our training calendar for 2021 and just want to be able to provide meaningful training and presentations to you. So I'll throw that in the chat, and then I'll turn the time over for Eric. Do you have other items you want to talk about? Oh, you're on mute.
Real quick, and I know we're at time, but there's a couple things I want to hit. One is there's a lot of interest in ketamine sparking again. I think as civil unrest becomes more prevalent between now and a certain day this month, I think you're going to hear a lot more about ketamine as well. So be prepared to address questions about that. There's a lot of federal agencies in interest right now, and there's a lot of federal questions going back and forth we've been answering. Two big things from our office. One is you're going to see a list of projects come out from the TAC and from our office of things that we want to accomplish with NHTSA, and we're working to try to get that out just as quick as we can. I'm going to say it's calendar year 2021, but many of these are more than a one-year project. It's the starting point for the direction ahead. We're using our SME advisory groups to help foster some of this information from other entities out in healthcare and outside of healthcare and outside of EMS. It's really important that you spend some time taking a look at these. These are what I base decisions on where to go for money. I will tell you that I am extremely aggressive about trying to grab other people's money, and my three big funding things for 2021 are find ways to fund a data manager in each state. That's my number one goal through NHTSA and DOT, and I can tell you that John Kramer's boss, a gentleman named Nanda, he gets tired of hearing it because he hears it about every week. We have a couple different plans for how we could possibly do that, so you're going to hear more about that. I want to fund projects one time. Anything that we can do to pass code out to the vendors or do that project once and send that out to the states so that it's not paid for multiple times. A good example of that's the health information exchange stuff with ONC and how we can get Cerner and Epic that the information and data they need in a way that they don't have to charge every ambulance service in the United States who wants to connect to a local hospital. That's the other huge priority. And the last one I'll mention, and this one is driving my legal people crazy, but I'll put it out there. I have realized that there is no way that Clayman, Julianne, myself, and others that are involved with NHTSA can cover all the projects, entities, and areas that NHTSA is mentioned in. And that I need to build a list of people who basically represent NHTSA in a lot of these areas. And I started doing this last year, unofficially, just kind of relying on people. I mentioned ESO and ketamine. That was a good example of where I relied very heavily on them for information. Colorado and what they were doing. I rely on the state use for image trend when I start talking about state data systems because they have they're the largest. So they're not just vendors, but state data managers and people with specific subject matter expertise. How can I use them as advocates, if they're willing, to be at some of these meetings and speak to the topics when we're there and when we're not there. Because quite honestly, the list of places that we're being asked to participate in, and meetings we're being asked to participate in, is just growing weekly. So you're going to hear more about that. I'll probably be reaching out to some of you saying, hey, would you be willing to? If you are, great, that's wonderful. If you're not, I understand. I'm still working out the pieces with our office and the legal team to make it clear you're not representing a federal entity, you're not committing funds, you're not committing resources. You're there to provide the subject matter expertise on NHTSA, and that's going to be important as we move forward. So there is a ton of projects going on with this. When you see the laundry list, please feel free to add to it. Give us your take on it. We'll be prioritizing it. We'll be talking about funding that's needed for it, where some of that funding should come from, concerns from the state and local level. But I would look for that somewhere in the February timeline. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Julianne.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any other questions or comments? I know we're out of time, but if there's anything for open forum, we're happy to take that now. So as always, feel free to reach out to any member of the TAC or to Eric with any questions, comments, concerns. Our next meeting will be January 27th, same time, same place. Please.
Julianne, this is Karen Jacobson. I apologize for not unmuting myself quickly. Greetings, everyone. It's been a long time since many of you have heard my voice. And towards that end, I'm also admitting that there's information that I don't know. So let me ask a general question. So if we go back to the state plans for version 3.5.0 transition, and then looking at the technical resources page, specifically the version 3 compliant software and compliance testing, when looking at version 3.5.0, as always, it's that question of when is the state system going to be ready to receive version 3.5.0 data, and when the EMS agency software systems are available as well. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of progress, either with the software systems that can collect, receive, and process the data, as opposed to the collect data EMS agency software. So what's the status? What are the vendors doing in order to move forward with version 3.5.0? And I also want to say, trust me, I get the fact that COVID hit. ET3 vaccinations are all a priority. So I want to say I get that, and thanks for everything everybody's doing for that. But how about version 3.5.0? What are vendors doing for development and testing? Thank you.
Yeah, Karen, this is Clay. I'm going to take that. So great to hear your voice, by the way. Really great to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Monet will be developing a list of kind of rollout dates and times, not only for states, but also for the software companies. So you're right. It's the chicken before the egg, or the egg before the chicken, right? So we'll get that information out. Clearly, folks are working on other things, as you mentioned, Karen, but we'll provide a list that would allow states to be able to strategize based on the plans of the software.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to stay on quickly, I did add the appropriate link this time to the chat. I apologize, but see if you can fill it out. It's really quick. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this morning. And we will see you again in just a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.